and really activism generally after working for the BBC in the 1990s. And I was trained by them in London back in the days before it was like it is today. And it was in the wake really of the sacking of the Director General Alistair Milne in the 1980s that some people may remember had been very critical of the Thatcher government. And Victor Rothschild asked the chairman of the BBC in 1987, can you sack the Director General? So he did, and the corporation I was trained in has become very different now, and I could see a lot of changes coming in. And I was reporting quite a lot on environmental issues in London and elsewhere, as you can see. I was working for Radio Solent and Wiltshire Sound. And for example, there was a protest camp just near Southampton that we were covering. And it just seemed to me the natural thing to do. When I'd been investigating child sexual abuse in Salisbury and found that really there was no real help from the owners of the radio station, Wiltshire Sound. And so I thought, well, what should I do? And I paused maybe for a few weeks, by which time they'd said, oh, we're not renewing your contract. So I got to the stage where I was thinking, well, okay, I think I need to get into actually do some of the activism, because I've been completely, I suppose, captivated by some of the campaigns that I've been reporting on for the public, you know, and being paid by the public to report on. We often forget these people are public servants, supposed to be anyway. So that's a bit about me. Then the Landeshaus was formed in 1995 with an action, Wisley Airfield. And I'd just like to run through some of the slides. It'd be very difficult to see these, actually. Can I just employ somebody, maybe you, just press this at the right point? Yes, can you press that? That's it, that one there. Oh, you can hardly see this. It's just tragic.
There'll be cloud coming over in a moment.
Maybe just stand there. Okay, well, what you can't see there, we'll leave it up for a minute. What you can't see there is one of the coaches on the Peace Convoy. The Convoy was something which started in the 1970s with the Stonehenge Festival and went on to the Glastonbury Festival afterwards, was involved in a lot of activism around anti-nuclear, for example, against the cruise missiles. And what they were doing was a wonderful kind of mobile squatting campaign. We're turning up with about 150 vehicles, and the decision-making process about where the convoy went was fascinating in itself. It was usually just the lead vehicle deciding where are we going to go. So they'd see a police roadblock and then they'd have to go that way, and the whole convoy would have to go that way. So it was a kind of flying squad of activists. I mean, there are all sorts of other problems with it, but this was a bit of an inspiration as well, because it was something that Thatcher also stopped in the 1980s. And it became pretty clear that the idea of turning up somewhere and just staying, even if it's just for a few days, was a very radical act in itself. And that's where my first prop comes in, which is this. I don't know if anyone has seen this before. It's called the Squatter's Handbook. Sorry for you, I'm coming out of the sun maybe towards you. But I'll go over here as well. But the Squatter's Handbook is just really enshrines the legal situation for people squatting buildings. It's got quite a lot in here about squatting land as well. So we were reading this stuff and thinking, well, we should be doing this stuff. And that's exactly what we did. Now, we can't stop the sun, can we? We wouldn't even want to. Because I've got a slide here which I really need, which is the Landeshaus. Can we just go through? I better go through myself. So I can see on here. Here we go. Now, if you can see that, maybe I can find out what's on there by doing this. No, I have to read it out from here. So, 1995 Wisley Airfield in Surrey, a whole bunch of us turned up, probably about 200 people, including the Dongus tribe. We were going to squat St George's Hill, which is the place with the diggers from the English Civil War squatted. But the people who were organising it got nervous at the last minute, so we went to Wisley Airfield. So it was a bit of a letdown. But we did have Green Party activist Shane Collins live on Newsnight in a bath in a field talking about land rights, saying, well, look, everybody needs land. Why are so few people the landowners in this country? Well, of course, it's a historical thing. Then in May 1996, there was an occupation in Wandsworth in London, which I helped organise. And these occupations, let me just say, great fun. You organise and book maybe 6 coaches. and fill them with people. In fact, you've got to guess how many people are going to come, but you get a reasonable good idea, and you make sure you've got all the coaches you need. You tell the coach company that you're going to do some conservation work, and you don't tell them where it is. So anyway, everyone gets into a coach. Each coach has got one person up the front who you trust. It's got a little envelope, and as the coach driver turns left, you say, right, you're going to turn right now. And anyway, we eventually ended up at Wandsworth with about 250 people to occupy this piece of land and turned it into a genuine eco-village for about 6 months.
Wow.
And it was a whole kind of copycat thing. Well, I'm not saying that derogatory. Did the similar thing in Wandsworth a few years afterwards because they were so inspired. It got called Pure Genius because the site was owned by Guinness. Obviously, that's their thing. And there are films around if you want to go online to have a look at what Pure Genius looked like. But it was the main thing about this is it was fun. Yes, there are problems with street drinking and drugs on site, and there always are if you're going to have a big site like that. But the media that came and reported on it, and funny enough, my old boss from the BBC turned up. He said, "What are you doing here?" Did it very sympathetically and understood the issues. Too many supermarkets, not enough affordable housing. And they were trying to build another supermarket on that particular site. We stayed there for 6 months. People have often asked me, why did they evict you? How, or what point, and what was the purpose? And it was all because the London Wildlife Trust had turned up on site one weekend and they'd done a wildlife report and they were just filing it. It said that there were more, the site was a significant wildlife site for southwest London, or for whatever, that part of London. And they were about to file that report, which would have made it much more difficult for the developers to develop the site. And so the weekend before the report was due to be filed on the Monday, they came and evicted the site and cleared it because of the wildlife. Actually, there was loads of buddleia. It had been there for about 10 years growing, and loads of wildlife, butterflies, etc. So that's the Guinness people for you. Then we did a few little smaller occupations, but then in April 1999 we had an occupation at St George's Hill in Surrey, at which point I really ought to go into some of the history of land rights in Britain, because this is one of the things we tried to do with the campaign, and I think we succeeded, was to draw out some threads from history, exciting moments in history where the people got together and grabbed a bit of land and actually, I suppose, put the frighteners on some of the people that just think they own and run the place. So if we go back through history, the big one, I suppose, would be the Doomsday Book, which is 1086, 2 years after the Norman Conquest. And people don't realise that when they were going around the country looking at individual villages, how many cows, etc., can we tax, that there were riots. People said, we're not having this. It was effectively an inventory of all of the farms, all of the resources of the country, so that William the Conqueror could tax it effectively, efficiently. It had never been done before. So people don't realise the riot. People said, we're not even telling you, we're hiding our cows. There was this sort of thing going on all over the country in the Normandy. And of course, there's a famous, if anyone's interested in that period, resistance over in Ely with a guy called Hereward the Wake, who had a fantastically successful campaign against the Normans. And it's a terrific tale in itself, probably make a great film actually. But how, for example, he flooded all the area so that the Normans couldn't get to Ely and couldn't find out what was going on in Ely. So he created completely an area which is completely out of their control. Does anyone know why it was called the Doomsday Book? Any guesses?
Would it be fixed in stone till doomsday?
Not bad. Yeah, well, pretty much. It was the fact that there was no appeal. No appeal. And this is the idea. When you come to St. Peter on Doomsday and you say, oh yeah, I know I killed such and such, there's no appeal. Yeah? So that's why the people at the time nicknamed it, a bit like we nicknamed the community charge the poll tax. Yeah? So this was the people's name for what the officials wanted to call something different.
No appeal against what?
Huh?
No appeal against what?
No appeal against your... I mean, with the Doomsday Book, if they said, you've got this amount, you just have to pay it. You can't say, oh, but we don't have that many cows, you just have to pay it. Otherwise, the Lord of the Manor could be arrested, etc. There's all sorts of penalties on you if you didn't deliver the tax on time. So you couldn't revise the book once those words were done. This is why people got so annoyed about it at the time. So that's back to William the Conqueror. Then let's go forward a bit till The dissolution of the monasteries was another massive change in land ownership. People often forget about. There's these ruins all around the place. I was up at Rivière Abbey last year. Absolutely amazing. You look at it, you think, what the hell happened here? It's a bit like in the city centre in Bristol. We've got a church in Castle Park, which is just a shell, and it's deliberately left like that to make people go, well, what happened there? I was chatting to one of the Poles. He said, I love that place. He said it reminds everybody about the Second World War, and it gets people thinking, what happened in this city? It's the idea is we don't sweep this stuff from history. It's a permanent memorial, as those amazing abbeys and cathedrals that have been destroyed around the country. Most of the cathedrals obviously kept, but the abbeys were destroyed. 9,000 monks and nuns were evicted, 900 monastic communities, and £90,000 extra for Henry VIII. So that's why it was done. It's just purely requisitioning the land, etc., for the king. Then that was 1535, 1540. Then 1549, 100 years before the Civil War, was something called Kett's Rebellion in East Anglia, where the whole of East Anglia was run from under an oak tree by a landowner called Robert Kett. Robert Kett had been a landowner himself, but he was about to enclose his property. Now, the locals around Norwich came up to him and said, Robert, you said you'd never do this. And he said, well, people know what enclosure is. Effectively, what it meant was putting up big fences where the general population had been allowed to graze their cattle, sheep, etc. in the past, if they had them. And it was really a privatisation of land which had been common land. And so they came up to Robert Kett and they said, look, you said you'd never do this. And he said, well, look, everyone else is doing it and they're encroaching onto my farmland, so I've got to enclose. But he said, I don't agree with it, I've just got to do it. And they said, well, look, we'll help you. So there was a massive rabble, effectively, led by Robert Kett, who changed his mind about enclosing his land at the last minute, that ran the whole county for about 2 or 3 months in 1549. Now, the king sent an army against them. They were just sent back because the locals were all very well armed. Eventually, one of the things that they did, because he was running the county from under this oak tree, Kett's oak is apparently still there, and he decided he was going to lock up the landowners who had been privatising land, had been enclosing, for stealing the land as thieves. So you're a thief, landowner, and he put them in Norwich jail. And they were going around the whole of the surrounding area of Norwich, tearing down the fences and filling in the ditches for about 2 months, until eventually the king's army came and the inevitable happened. The second attempt by the king put the rebellion down. Then in the English Civil War, 1645 to 49, really was a battle between the ruling classes. You know, some people talk about it as a revolution. Of course it wasn't. It was the merchant classes, led by Cromwell and Parliament, versus the feudal classes, which were represented by the king. So it was a battle amongst the different parts of the ruling class, and a horrendous battle as well. I mean, it really was. I was up in Nottinghamshire recently, in Newark. They've got a great exhibition about the English Civil War. It's very little. We don't really seem to get taught very much about it. But there were some brilliant movements, both in the church and in civil society, in the Civil War. The people like the Quakers, the Baptists, various other non-conformists who didn't like the Church of England, formed their own churches and said, well, they've had enough of the Church of England. A lot of people are thinking that today, actually, still. Of course, now we've got an oil man as Archbishop of Canterbury, I think. Welby, who used to work in the oil industry. So that was the English Civil War, and the diggers were a very important, I think, expression. Gerard Winstanley was their leader. They took hold of a piece of land in Surrey and said, well, everyone needs land, so we're going to take some and we're going to dig and we're going to grow crops on it. And there's been a lot of songs written and books. And really, we didn't know much about the diggers in the English Civil War until the end of the Second World War, when writers like Christopher Hill, who wrote The World Turned Upside Down, exposed this side, the People's Civil War, as a proper historian. There are a couple of really good books on it, which will explain to you, I suppose, how this fits in with our history, this important battle, a massive battle going on, but there was a few people who could see what it was really about. It's about control of land. And of course they were put down after a while, and that was the reason I mentioned them was because we did actually go and occupy for 2 weeks the same part of the country. It was actually on St George's Hill in Surrey, where the diggers were in the Civil War in 1649. And funnily enough, it's now a private gated estate. It's like the Beverly Hills of Britain. But we found a bit of land which was, because you're not really even supposed to walk on there, but we went and found a piece of land and said, right, we can squat here for a week. And we were. We got very sympathetic coverage, as I said, from the TV, ITV London and the BBC in London. And the idea is to raise these issues. Political theatre, that's really what it's about, isn't it? Have a bit of fun and get people talking. That's really what that was our message anyway. Okay, also important bits of history are 1879, the Irish Land League. The Irish did an amazing job in the 1870s. Michael Davitt ran this Land League, which of course, obviously this is post the famines, and actually some of the hunger was still going on in Ireland. And it was really a horrendous, cynical exercise in starving a whole load of people so that they could be persuaded to get on a bunch of ships and colonise America. Horrible, horrible thing, in fact. And yet there was a brilliant thing was done by the Irish MPs, which were in Westminster. Funny enough, very much like the DUP today, right? Back in that time, they held the balance of power between the Whigs and the Tories in Westminster. And these Irish MPs said, okay, well, we'll come with your side. It doesn't seem to me as if the DUP has got anything for their deal, apart from some dosh. But they said, if you do one thing, and that is to return the land to the people in Ireland, and everyone was quite sympathetic because the Irish had been through a hell of a lot, people knew this. So what they did is they got government loans to buy and build on what had been destitute, tenanted properties right over Ireland. So that meant that someone who'd been living in a hovel would get a loan from the government, no interest loan, to buy their property that they were renting, and also to build a decent home on it. And this happened right across Ireland in the late part of the 19th century. And it completely transformed the landscape. So you've got, instead of destitute peasants, you've got owner-occupiers with decent homes. And they're paying often less in loan repayments than they were rent to the old landowners. So this was an absolute revolution in Ireland, and it set a fire underneath the Irish, which of course carried on until the First World War and the Irish uprising, the Free State and all that. So the Irish I think we've got a lot to learn from them about the use of politics to actually make where we're living a lot better. A bit later on, in the 1880s, the Highland clearances in Scotland were horrific. Anyone's ever read the book by John Preble, etc., about the way bedridden people were like burnt in their own homes out in the middle of nowhere where no one could see them, just to get rid of people from the crofts. Now the crofters fought back, and in 1888 there was something called the Battle of the Braes in Skye, where there was an eviction party coming over to Skye, to a place called Portree, from Portree, to the Braes, and the women of Skye organised. Well, the men didn't want to do it because they're saying, I've got to do what the laird said. But actually, it was the women of Skye organised an ambush of the eviction party. And they were hiding behind rocks and stuff, and they jumped out on all these police that had come up from Glasgow and just literally pounded them from above with rocks and drove them back. So anyway, this was a big hoo-ha about this in the Times. Oh my God, the wild women of Skye have attacked the police, blah, blah, blah. And there was and as a result of it, there was a royal commission into the grievances of the crofters. And what we've got now in crofting in Scotland is the embodiment in law of what was the traditional way of holding land. Right? So that means that you don't pay anyone for it, you can inherit it, you can't sell it. A croft you can't sell, you've got to either pass it down to someone in your own family, or else you've got to hand it back to the crofting group, or local crofting association, and they have a waiting list, and they'll say, well, these people have been waiting for 10 years for a croft, they're going to have it. But no money changes hands, key. So you can't lose it. So you can't get a bank loan against your property because you can't sell that property. So that's crofting. And if anyone's ever up in Scotland, particularly on the Highlands or on the West Coast, there's quite a few of these little crofting museums which will teach you a lot about the way land used to be held here in Britain, because that's effectively what it is now in Scotland, in crofting. And so in the 1880s, they enshrined this form of land tenure in law in a rather wonderful fashion. So that kind of brings us quite close to today. I was listening actually on the radio on the way down to President Xi, Remember him? The Chinese, I suppose he's the president, even though kind of nobody elects him. And he was talking about land speculation to China this week, and all of the locals were saying, yes, you're right, we've got to stop speculation in land. Now, as the economy starts to go wrong, as it is, since 2008, we've had this kind of fake economy where they're injecting money in all the time, hoping it will stay alive. And most of that money just goes to rich people or people with investment funds or shares or property. It keeps property prices up, and it's not really real. And the companies that have got high share prices, if you actually look at their books, they're not really generating enough income to justify those high share prices. People are starting to think, well, maybe there's a bubble here. Yeah? And maybe we should be hedging our bets. Maybe we should be buying property somewhere like London, expensive flat in Knightsbridge. It's a better place to put our money than the stock market. So we're seeing that here in spades. Enormous amount of property speculation. In fact, even when I was on a board of a housing association in Bristol a few years ago, I put my hand up at the board. I was a tenant's rep on the board, and said, "We've got all this land. We're banking it. Aren't we really? Aren't we surely we're speculators? We're not really building on this land. We're just speculating with it." And everyone around all the other directors said, "Oh, this is terrible. How can you say such a thing?" And the chief executive said, "Well, yes, we are actually." And so that shouldn't be what a housing association is doing. It shouldn't be doing that. Yeah? It should not be. But in fact, it was the fact that the development manager was more interested in gambling than buying bits of land. The point here really is you've got loads and loads of people, increasingly people now, owning land that have got no intention of doing anything with it, except keeping everyone else off. In the city centres as well, in Bristol, we've got enormous tracts of the city centre that nothing's happening with it. It's just either been bulldozed or it's an empty building that's got Cytex, that's this stuff, up on the windows. And it's just being used as a gambling chip, effectively. We're hoping that this is going to go up in value, and they're keeping people out from it. So I think that whole side of one of the things we've said in our new land sales leaflet, I say this is kind of came out for the Green Gathering this year, which was land banking and speculation. While some of us are desperate to get on the unaffordable housing ladder, other individuals and companies own so much land they don't know what to do with it. The stock market bubbles made land a safer investment for those who have no intention of ever using it. So we're in this weird world where the most valuable resource to our communities is stuck in an account somewhere, possibly somewhere else in the world. And if you try and do anything with it, they just evict you, or they're not interested. In Bristol, in Stokes Croft, we've got a massive building, the carriage works, which has been empty for about 25 years now. No one can actually get anyone to do anything with it. It's a prime site, prime location, but the guy's just looking at who owns it. It's just saying, well, the value's going up all the time, so why should I do anything with it? And this is a real knotty problem that we're trying to get people to deal with. It's great to hear, I think it was the Labour conference this year, John McDonnell, the Labour Shadow Chancellor, talking about exactly this, saying, well, if you're not going to use the land, we are going to tax you. We're going to start taxing you a few months after the land falls into disuse, and we're going to keep taxing you until you lose it, which is exactly the attitude we need. We really do need. We need government to step in here and say, no, land is not just there for you to use as an investment. We need it. Another side of this is assets or liabilities. People are assets, they're not liabilities. We're getting into this mindset now that, oh no, there's all these people there, oh, what are we going to do with them? Things like the refugees coming across from